As you know, unemployment is a very big crisis that India is going through right now. And according to the CMI report, the unemployment rate rose to 9.2% in June, which was 7% in May in this year. What do you think are the factors that is contributing to this increased rate of unemployment in our country?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I just want to highlight is that the unemployment rate, which is around between 8 and sometimes 10%, is actually quite low for a country like India. I mean, given the size of our workforce, it's actually fairly low. And I think the one of the reasons for is that and this is not something unique to me, but unemployment as a measure is often not the right measure when you want to look at the sort of the health of the labor market, right? Because in a country like India, where a lot of people are poor and people have to work, they don't have the choice to remain unemployed. And particularly when you have a very high share of the informal sector, which is, so you can have these kind of very informal employment. What really happens in the context of a poor economy is that most people will actually not be unemployed, but rather the unemployed. What happens is there'll be high levels of informal employment. If you look closely at the unemployment number, what is happening here is that this is actually something that is primarily being driven by young people and highly educated people. So both in terms of people who are entering the workforce anew and also people who've achieved a certain level of education and there is certain aspiration for certain kinds of jobs. And possibly that they come from higher income households because they've been able to get that high level of education. They are the ones who are primarily unemployed. And in that context, when you look at specifically unemployment of the young workers and educated workers, that is a problem because we are in a sense not utilizing the full potential of our economy and our demography.
But the young population, as you mentioned, according to the ILO report, the 83% of the Indian youth is unemployed. Is that because of their willingness to find like qualified jobs, or what is the case we are dealing with here?
Yeah, so if you actually look further at just the young workers, what you're going to find is the I'm not very sure about this 83% and exactly how it was calculated, but in the State of Working India report that we bring out at the Center for Sustainable Employment at Azim Prince University, what we found is that the unemployment rate for the young graduates, so the young 18 to 24-year-olds who have graduated and are sort of entering the labor market anew, that's an unemployment rate of 42%. Okay. And one problem, so that's what I meant in the earlier thing, that so you have this very highly educated potential workforce who are not getting the kind of work that they want because job creation has slowed down in the country. And as a result, they are not willing to sort of engage in, there's a certain benchmark in the kind of jobs that they want to undertake, and they're not willing to take up sort of temporary jobs. And when those kinds of jobs are not available, you have them waiting out for a good job. So that's really what is happening, I think, amongst the highly educated youngsters. In the case of unemployment rate amongst the less educated, um, assuming that most of these people are also coming from households where income is fairly low. If you take the educational attainment as sort of an indicator of how wealthy the household is, for this is actually potentially some kind of distress that they actually do need work and they're not able to find work, and you have different manifestations of both of these problems. Especially in the case of, you put out advertisements and you've seen these massive queues for jobs for, two or three vacancies that are announced, and you have huge number of people lining up, which is a clear manifestation of uh, this pool of people, a huge supply of people who are qualified, wanting jobs, and then the good, suitable jobs just not being available.
Again, the PLFS report says that 57.3% of the workforce were self-employed. So how does that
Hmm.
add on to the reports of unemployment in the country?
Yeah. So I think this is where what I mentioned earlier about the informal employment comes into play, right? So when you have an economy which is fairly where the average household earns below, say, 15 to 20,000 per month, or even actually less than that, they have to work. You need to bring in income, and when you don't have a wage work or a salaried job, then the next best option, or maybe the only option for many households, is that they set up a small petty enterprise. Okay, this could be street food vending. It could be just starting a small little shop outside your house. So there are these small scale activities that are set up. And so if you look at the self-employment, that is really what it is. So you can think of self-employment as one kind of self-employment where you start a firm, you hire a lot of people, but you are your own boss, you're your manager, right? Now, and so but you're also creating employment. But that constitutes about 1% of India's self-employed. I mean, very small share of the workforce in India. Most of India's self-employed are people who are own account workers, where it's a one-person business or enterprise. They don't really hire, they don't create jobs. They just make sort of just enough to break even, sometimes not even that. So the large share of self-employment, especially the increase in self-employment, and in more recent years, what you're seeing is the increase in self-employment as well as a fall in salaried work, right? Because as an economy grows, what you want is that it creates good, secure, salaried jobs. And that has not happened in the Indian context. So it's these two things, one of self-employment going up and the other of salaried wage work actually going down, which is pointing towards the fact that even though you might have employment rate being fairly okay, but the kind of employment that is being created in more recent years is not the kinds that would suggest a healthy labor market.
Talking about a healthy labor market, the government this year during their budget mentioned that they plan to bridge the gap by providing internship opportunities in top 500 companies, which is predominantly in the private sector. So, how do you see the government's plan to curb unemployment in the coming years, given their proposals in this year's budget?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look specifically at this particular scheme that was announced, right, and let's break down the numbers, it's 1 crore. What has been proposed is 1 crore youth to be employed in the 500 top firms over 5 years. Sorry?
Internships, not employment.
Yes, to be interned in those 500 top firms over 5 years, which essentially breaks down to every firm potentially hiring 20,000 interns or interning 20,000 people. And if you're thinking of that each intern gets a year placement with a company, then that's again breaking down to 4,000 interns per firm. And it's, when you bring it down to that and you think that, okay, in a year, a firm is going to be managing 4,000 interns, it's a massive number, right? Given that the average firm size in India is not very large. We don't have too many of these massive, large scale operations. So it is quite a big ask on the side of the government to the private firms. Because one must also think of what is the rationale for a firm to undertake something, this kind of a venture, right? Bring on so many interns. For private sector, there needs to be sort of an incentive for them. So I'm not sure how much of this is going to get actually taken up in terms of actual implementation and actually private firms taking up something like this. So we've had, these kind of similar private and initiatives or private-led initiatives, even with skilling prior also, that there was these kind of mechanisms where private sector would collaborate with the training institutes and kind of help them to develop the skilling programs and then bring on the apprentices from there, which has not always worked out very well, often because the incentives are not very well structured. So I'm not completely convinced how this is going to play out in terms of actually creating jobs. Or I mean, I think the larger intention with this was not as much creating jobs, but more towards easing the school to work transition. So there's this initial friction that as you graduate, there's a difficulty in securing the job. And the intention with this is that, hey, we're going to offer you these internships, which will help you skill and help you get some experience. And maybe with that, you find your inroad into the labor market for a longer time period beyond just an internship. So two things here. One is that, when there's just no jobs available, after the 1 year or 6 months, you've been skilled, so to speak, and you've finished your internship, where do they go, right? So you could potentially be creating a pool of maybe skilled people who don't find the jobs that they want after that skilling. The second thing is, will the private sector take up something like this? Why would they want to take up something like this? So I'm not particularly optimistic, and we'll have to wait and see really. And I think, but in a sense, it's on par for course for this particular administration in terms of how they viewed the job creation issue.
Finally, the government also proposed the model skill loan scheme, which gives up to rupees 7.5 lakhs of loan to 25 students annually. So now they have introduced this loan scheme. How does debt contribute to an economy's youth, and how will it help, or otherwise, the young population? Let's say if they're taking debt and then trying to go for further studies, but then again the unemployment crisis is still there.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think this is also, it's not to say that these schemes are not well intentioned, but I think it's trying to put a band-aid on a fracture. There's a systematic structural break, and we need to fix that problem, right? Now, in terms of the loans, what the issue is that, sure, there is a problem that we are not, that households are going into debt, savings have come down. So there's been some recent evidence that household savings has fallen. So clearly, educational expenses is a burden on households, and so in that sense, this might ease that for many households. But then, like you said yourself, the issue is that, well, even if you get this loan, and if you're not able to repay, or if you're not just repay, but if you're not even able to get a job, what is the point in taking that loan, right? So I think that it's again goes back to the issue that we faced even with the internship issue, where if there are no jobs available after they finish, then what do you do, right? But I think again, I just want to say that with this, it's really not a surprising approach, because what the government has been doing previously again is that the way it's approached problems is to say that, well, it's either been capital expenditure or extending credit to the private sector. And the approach has always been sort of, okay, we've kind of made these facilities available for the private sector, and now it's on you to create the jobs and to kind of boost the economy. Now, with the previous budgets, when the credit schemes were being announced and these loans were extended, the private sector has sort of been sitting on its hands and not taking it up. And so what the government has done is, okay, let's move the need a little bit and bring this closer to the time addressing the problem, and let's do this more sort of direct interventions, but again rooted via the private sector, right? But again, in this kind of an approach, as you can see, the onus really is on the private sector to take up something, either to take up the student who's taken a loan and got this high education, or to take on these internships. And in the context of, the general nature of the labor market that we've had, and the kind of stagnation of manufacturing and, good jobs, I don't know how much of this actually will get taken up by the private sector. I think it's just too much of the onus is on the private sector to fill some of the structural problems that are there in the economy.